Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. A number of familiar faces in here, so I'm happy to see you all. And this is the first time we are taking on a presentation like this, where we're doing a little bit more of a deeper dive into our forest and our forest health. So those of you that don't know me, my name is Jess Moore. I am the Wildland Project Coordinator here at Evergreen Fire. And I will allow each presenter as we go through the evening to introduce themselves. We have got a number of folks here that are through conservation districts, through open space foresters, through the US Forest Service, wildlife biologists, so watershed groups. We've got private arborists that we're going to get a full circle view on the state of our forest, forest history, watershed health, wildlife impact, all of that today, as well as that fire perspective. So we will get started. We're going to be kind of bouncing on the PowerPoints, so bear with us as we move between presenters, but I want to go ahead and just get us off and running right from the start. So Matt?
Will these be posted online?
We can figure out, I know that Sharon is recording this entire presentation for us through My Mountain Town, so the presentation will be available online. Yes.
Great.
And thank you, Sharon, for doing that.
Of course.
Do I take questions at the end, or just save that?
How about we hold questions till the end for everyone, and then that way, and we'll all stay available. So, because some of your questions in between might get answered in subsequent presentations.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, so I'm Matt McLemore. I'm the Forest Program Manager at Jefferson Conservation District. So I'm just going to talk for 10-15 minutes about forest history and fire ecology here on the Front Range. So just kind of a quick overview. First off, who's JCD? Who am I? We are a non-taxing special district based in Jefferson County. So you can see our geographical boundaries here. We operate on a nonprofit business model because we're non-taxing. And so most of our revenue is derived from grants and fees for service. We do work a little bit outside of Jeffco. So there's no conservation districts in Clear Creek or Gilpin County, so we work into those counties a little bit. And then we operate, we do project management where we take on conservation work, typically on private lands, occasionally on public land. And we also partner really closely with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So that's a federal agency under the Department of Agriculture. We have 4 main programs. So we have a forest restoration program, a noxious weed mitigation program, a pretty new stream restoration program, and then we partner with Jefferson County to run their slash collection program, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. So to get us started, just to kind of roll back in time to 1995, we've got this pretty nondescript forested landscape. Fast forwarding about 7 years later, and these big brown blobs have appeared. Anybody know what we're looking at here?
Beetle kill.
Not beetle kill.
Hayman.
Yep. So this is the Buffalo Creek and Hayman Burn Scar Complex. So that's Wellington Lake. And these were some of the largest fires in Colorado's history. Especially the Hayman was the biggest up until 2020 when the Cameron Peak and East Troublesome eclipsed it. So these 2 fires really spurred a lot of people to ask the question, where did this come from? Why did this happen? Because in recorded history, people weren't familiar, had never seen fires burning on this type of scale. And so that's where I like to start too. So we're asking the question, why do these fires happen? And also, why do we care about the forest in general? So we can name some things that we like about the forest, and we call that stuff ecosystem services. So it's things like a place to live, clean water, clean air, place to recreate, things like that. And it really takes an entire landscape to provide all those things. So thousands to millions of acres. One single property is even a 500-acre property is not large enough to provide all of these ecosystem services. There's also things that we don't like. We tend to dislike about the forest, so wildfire, floods, insects, and disease. And even though we don't like those, it's important to know that those were historically part of a functioning forest ecosystem. The reality is today, these disturbances, and particularly fire, can damage the ecosystem such that it does not provide these ecosystem services that we want and need from our forests. So how did we get here, and what caused these problems? Let's start with just some basic Forest Ecology 101 here in Colorado, and this is prior to major human disruption. And so the forests change on an elevational gradient around here. Up at high elevations greater than 9,000 feet, the forests are generally cooler and wetter. There's a lot of subalpine spruce and fir. And then down at lower elevations below 9,000 feet, we've got some open, drier forests that are more dominated by ponderosa pine with some Douglas fir mixing in. And then at those middle elevations, we've got some aspen and lodgepole pine. So at these different elevations, fire behaves differently as well. And again, this is historically speaking, so prior to people settling in the 1800s. So at high elevations, we've got dense forests, and because they're cooler and wetter, lightning didn't ignite fires very frequently. But when it did, because they were so dense, we get these high-intensity crown fires, where most fires die, or most trees die during that type of fire. And that cycle repeated itself every few hundred years. And because these forests were adapted to this type of fire, the trees were able to regrow, and then that cycle repeated itself. On the flip side, at lower elevations, we've got drier, more open forests that are more susceptible to wildfire, particularly lightning strikes. And so we'd get more frequent fires that were burning at a generally lower intensity along the ground through the grass. And most of the trees would survive that type of fire because it's less hot, it's not getting up into the crowns as frequently. And that type of cycle repeated itself every few years to every few decades, as opposed to every few centuries at those higher elevations. So what caused the disruption to the fire cycle at our low elevation forests? Well, we start with that fire-dependent ecosystem that I've talked about that was more open. And then again, in the mid-1800s, we get the settlers arriving on the scene. And they brought with them livestock. And the livestock grazed the land and overgrazed it and ate a lot of those grasses that the fires would burn through. And then we started to have trees filling in the gaps. And then right around the early 1900s, we started intentionally fighting fires and putting them out. And it was also a bit of a cooler and wetter period that was really perfect for tree germination. And then over time, we've gotten better and better at putting out fires. And so the basic story is we've gone from open forest conditions that were largely maintained by low to medium intensity fires, 100 years without fire, and we're left with dense forests with a lot more trees. And so what we've seen is that we've got this high intensity crown fire that was typical at higher elevations, creeping down to our low elevation forests. And our forests at these elevations are not resilient to this type of fire. They don't come back. And so these are pictures from that Buffalo Creek fire, which was nearly 30 years ago, and it largely looks the same out there. There's not a lot of trees regrowing, and the reason is that the trees, especially ponderosa pine, cannot cast their seeds very far. And so when we get these large swaths of denuded forest without trees, there's no seed source for them to come back. And so where we once had forest, we now have grassland. So how do we know that our forests used to be more open? Well, there's a couple lines of evidence, but I'll highlight a few here. First, we call forensic forestry. So a lot of the stumps that were cut from trees logged during that settlement period are still here today. And so you can walk around the forest and count the number of historic stumps and compare them to the number of trees today, and you'll see that there are far more trees today than there used to be. These historic stumps are here because it's so dry that things just don't rot very quickly. And so this is a great thing to kind of note as you're just walking around. There's also fire scars. So low intensity fires leave fire scars on trees as they burn past, and a lot of the time those trees would survive. And particularly old trees have seen multiple fire scars. And this one you can tell, you can cross-date the fire scars with other trees in the area, and you'll notice that as you go forward in time, there were fires pretty frequently right up until the mid-1800s, and then they stopped. There's also a lot of photographic evidence from the early 1900s. So this is from a ponderosa pine forest in Montana, and you can see that it's very open. The settlers were able to drive their wagons right through these forests. We got a red star on a tree that stays the same. And so 30 years later, we've got a lot of the overstory trees have been cut by logging, and we've got a lot of little trees starting to fill in the gaps. 50 years later, the little trees have gotten bigger, starting to get pretty dense, and by 1989, we've got a really dense forest. And so you can see that over less than 100-year period, we went from a forest that was maintained by fire to a forest condition where if there is a fire, it's going to completely eliminate that forest. And it's really that's really the story across the western U.S. in these type of forests. Here's a picture from Jefferson County, so 1896 on the left, and you can see by 2000 we've got a pretty dense carpet of trees. And then here's another one from Sphinx Rock near Pine, Colorado. And again, same story with this picture. There's also been a ton of research done to synthesize a lot of this evidence that we see out on the land. And these are just a few publications that do a really good job of really synthesizing all that research together into digestible packets for people to read. There was another change that happened over that 100 years, which is that people started moving into these fire-dependent ecosystems, which increased the demand for firefighting, and the more fires we put out, the more fuel there was on the ground, so that when a fire does happen, it makes it worse. So what can we do about this problem, about the wildfire problem we've got? It's important to just think quickly about what it takes for a fire to occur. There's three elements: oxygen, heat, and fuel. Oxygen is the air. We can't change that. Heat comes from a lightning strike or a human-caused ignition, and we're not really going to change that stuff either. And fuel is trees or vegetation, homes, and anything that can burn, really. And the reality is we're never going to eliminate any of these three things. So that means we have to always accept the risk that a fire could occur on the land. And the only one of these three elements we can actually change is fuel. So we have to ask ourselves, if fire is inevitable, what type of fire do we want in our low elevation forests? Well, the answer is obvious. We want that lower intensity, easier, safer to manage for firefighters type of fire that actually is ecologically beneficial, as opposed to that high intensity crown fire that can be ecologically damaging. So how do we change the fuels, and how do we mitigate so that our forests and community have a greater chance of surviving a wildfire? I'll talk quickly about just a few common forest treatments you'll see out there. So we've got our current condition that's pretty dense, a lot of dead trees out there. A basic treatment you could do would just be an understory removal, where you're just cutting the little trees and leaving all of the larger standing trees. Next up, you might see an even space crown thinning, which is more typical around defensible space around houses. Just to create some canopy spacing, so it's harder for that fire to jump tree to tree through the crown. And then finally, there's the variable mosaic option, which most closely mimics those historic forest conditions that were maintained by that lower intensity fire. And so as you move left to right across this spectrum, all of these risks decrease. The risk of crown fire, the fire intensity, and the risk of loss of the forest and homes and lives. And similarly, moving left to right across the spectrum here, these benefits increase. So stuff like wildlife habitat, ecological function of the forest, and the probability of the forest persisting for future generations. And so when you're thinking about these types of treatments, it really depends on your priorities. And that's the reason that you'll see the larger land management agencies focusing on this variable mosaic option is number one, because it most closely mimics that historic condition that was maintained by fire. And number two, because it has the highest probability of the forest surviving, and then it reduces the embers that are cast from the forest that might land on structures and ignite them. It also has the most benefit for our watersheds and for wildlife. Just quickly to illustrate, this is a photo from a project that JCD did a few years ago. So this is the forest condition before the treatment. Here it is immediately after. It looks pretty rough. It's brown. There's not much growing on the ground. But just 1 year later, we've got a lot of grass coming in. It's really starting to green up. And 2 years later, you can hardly tell that there was any work done on the ground. So again, when you're thinking about these treatments, when you're out there walking around the woods, it all comes down to your priorities. What do you want from your forest? Do you want the privacy of a closed forest, or is the risk of a high intensity fire too great? And again, that's why you'll see the larger land management agencies focusing on that variable mosaic treatment that mimics that historic condition. And that's really where that term forest restoration comes from that you'll hear thrown around. So that's the end of my talk. Here's some contact info, and I'll be here the rest of the night. So thanks, Jess.
Right, so again, my name is Jess Moore. I am the Wildland Project Coordinator here at Evergreen Fire and Rescue. I would like to build a little bit more on what Matt said and explained through this course of our forest history. And the reason what has happened is he spoke to, we have chosen to build our homes and our communities within an environment that was designed to burn and to have fire move through it at a standard rate. So that's where, as these catastrophic wildfires began occurring, that's where fire departments started having folks like me that have forestry backgrounds diving into the wildfire side of things, because this is not just about open forest stands anymore. This is how us building our homes within our forest stands creates a whole nother level of problems that at the end of the day ultimately comes down to life safety. So, some of this will be a little repetition to what Matt said. I'd like to think of it as reinforcing. So, again, just a couple of vantage points. I don't know, can everyone recognize this vantage point? Looking at Independence and Bear. Now, one thing that, yeah, it is crazy, right? This is if you're not familiar, if you're not recognizing, this is driving towards downtown on Meadow Drive. It was that construction detour for so many weeks last summer. One of the things that we're also dealing with in addition to all of this, so we know that our forests have changed and that we've built our homes in the middle of them, but what we're also dealing with is that reality of climate chaos. So not only are our forests now completely overstocked, they're completely unhealthy. I liken it to our forests have cancer. So some of these mitigation treatments that create very emotional responses, you have to think of it like that's chemotherapy. We're trying to save the forest long term. Might not be pretty in that initial take, but it's to save it long term, because we know that it's only going to continue to get worse, as our insurance companies all are very aware of. This represents from 1980 to 2021 catastrophic events, weather events. Now keep in mind, wildfire is just a teeny tiny little orange blip across this chart. But our reality is this is what our insurance companies are looking at. They are also looking at our reality, and this is Evergreen's fire district. This is our reality. The veg type and the overgrowth that we have created this reality. And we filled our homes into that reality. So how should our forests look? Again, building on what Matt already explained, more open, healthy stands. Had fire been allowed to do its job, a fire-resilient forest is a healthy forest. A healthy forest is a fire-resilient forest. Fire can behave when the forest is healthy, but our forests are not healthy, and then you get Hayman fires, Cameron Peak, East Troublesome. Add that to the climate chaos, the extreme drought cycling, the extreme heat cycling, the weather, the wind conditions that came with Marshall Fire in December. These climate chaos events added to the overgrowth, and then our homes built in the middle of it, create catastrophe. Super familiar? It's Brook Forest. Love you guys up there. Lodgepole, it's awesome. Let's build our houses right in the middle of it. As Matt also said, when you have overstocking like that and you do have a fire, that fire is no longer well behaved, creeping around on the ground, doing some good cleaning, it is now ripping through the canopy, and when it rips, it is now going to be tossing, thanks to the chaotic winds, it's now going to be tossing embers well out in advance. It used to be, when I started in this 19 years ago, 19 and a half, almost 20 years ago, our standard would say 1.5 mile ember cast. It is now up to 3+ miles. And you can see in this fire, you can see where those embers are pushing out ahead of the fire. And our houses are out there. So what do? Defensible space, home hardening, and the third leg of that stool are mitigation projects around our communities. We have to create protective halos around our communities so that as fire, because the reality is that we are not stopping these fires. The firefighters, we joke, okay, firefighters are heroes. We're not stopping these catastrophic wildfires. We can't get out in front of them. Same reason I can't send people out into the Gulf of Mexico and turn a Category 5 into a Category 2. Can't do it. It's not going to happen. Same issue. Climate chaos has escalated these environmental impacts to our communities. So what happens on the Gulf Coast? They are now building and engineering their homes to withstand higher category hurricanes. We have to do the same thing in our communities. And it is a three-legged stool: defensible space, home hardening, and halos of mitigation around our communities, so that we can get fire on the ground as it moves into our communities, so that as embers are lofting into our communities, our homes are hardened, and they don't get and receive that impact from ember cast, and we can change the fire behavior within our communities. Homes burn 3 ways within wildfires. They burn from the direct flame, potential radiant heat, and embers. Now, the thing that most people are deathly afraid of is that wall of fire. That's actually the least likely way that your home will ignite. Embers are the most likely way. So that's why we push so hard, and we have our free home assessments that we offer through Evergreen Fire, is so that my mitigation specialist, Dorian Keenan, they can come out and they can give you a personalized plan of attack on recommendations that you can do for your home, both in home hardening and defensible space. Because this is what it'll look like. This is if it's just small fuels. Once a home ignites, those embers can get huge, and they can loft for miles. Shake shingles, those burn really well and loft really far for a long time. So again, what we look at are ways to change fire behavior as it approaches our community. When we're in that defensible space zone out to 100 feet, and then potentially that mitigation halo around the communities, what we're looking at doing, because again, you look outside, we are not going to be able to mitigate all of Evergreen. We're just not. So what do? We change the fire behavior as it comes close to structures and thus lives. So how do we get it on the ground? We mitigate that area of property to look more like the forest should look had we allowed fire to do its job, creating that natural forested environment that Matt discussed previously. If we can get fire on the ground, and as it moves in closer, we hit that second zone of defensible space, that 5 to 30 foot zone, call it the lean, clean, and green zone. You're breaking up fuel ladders in that zone and giving even less fuel, and the fuel that you do have in there is well maintained. So it's irrigated, dead branches are limbed off, so that if fire makes it into that and one bush ignites, it's not a big deal. One tree ignites, it's not a big deal. That's where we're addressing radiant heat impact. Because we've already taken the direct flame out of the equation, right? Because we drop fire to the ground, also where it's actually fightable. But we've dropped fire to the ground. As it moves in, we now have the radiant heat potential, and we're going to take care of that by having it be lean, clean, and green. That last 0 to 5 feet, non-combustible. So if it makes it through that 5 to 30 foot zone, it's skunking around, it hits non-combustible, it's dead in the water. The house itself, those embers are raining down like snow. But if you've hardened your home and you have a good 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone, those embers don't do anything. They will fizzle out. Don't give them something to ignite. Just another example of where in this untreated, unmitigated area, you get a lightning strike that hits a bed of pine needles. Now it's going to rip into the grass runs into the bushes into the small regen trees, into the mid-range trees, all the way up, and now we have a canopy fire. Again, a canopy fire is not fightable. Canopy fire will rip and it will destroy that forest, and they tend to burn so hot that they will also cause that soil to become hydrophobic, and we'll have Hayman burn scars. This is just another example, very similar to what Matt was showing. Forested areas that have been untreated that are allowed to rip because they're not fightable. I say allowed, Mother Nature shouldn't care. She rips it through, and our reality is that soil and that forest is nuked. It's done. It will not regrow. Main takeaways here. Fire is naturally occurring in our forest. We need to better learn how to cohabitate with it by creating an environment that it can move through in a healthy manner. What we have right now, it cannot move through in a healthy manner. It is our responsibility, by choosing to live in this environment, to do our best to not be part of the problem. And if you're not doing your due diligence on your property, your defensible space, your home hardening, if and when a fire happens, you are part of the problem. This also becomes an even bigger part of the problem if you are not practicing and knowing your evacuation. You're not signed up for Lookout Alert. You're not participating in those processes. It is through Evergreen Fire that we work with volunteers within the community. And this is something that we encourage, is every single one of us that lives in Evergreen lives within what we call our plan units. And within our plan units, we have volunteers that help us get the word out into the community. I have a number of ambassadors in here. These are our volunteer ambassadors. And this is where, if you want to help, every single one of our volunteer ambassadors would love to have you on their team. So if that is something that you're interested as far as being a part of this process with us, We want to strongly encourage that, and then please grab one of us at the end of it. Dory Dalton is one of our mitigation specialists, and Keenan Prouty in the back is another one of our mitigation specialists, or myself. Grab one of us, and we will definitely get you lined up on how to help us get this messaging out into the community so that we can all be a part of this community and increase the longevity of it beyond fire. All right, so now, as we move on, I would like to introduce Kelby Woodard with Clear Creek Watershed.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, you are. Perfect. That's yours.
Thanks.
Oh. We're working off a couple of different systems here, so forgive me. There we go.
Sweet. Thanks. Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Kelby Woodard. I'm with the Clear Creek Watershed and Forest Health Partnership. Thanks to Jess for inviting me out to talk a little bit about post-fire effects on watershed health. This talk is focused on healthy forests, and healthy forests lead to healthy watersheds. So that's kind of our goal with the Clear Creek Watershed. So my background is in forest ecology. I just finished grad school 2 years ago now at CSU in ecology. I worked with the US Forest Service on a variety of management and research projects across the Front Range, and then one season down in Flagstaff, Arizona. My title for the partnership is a forest and mitigation program manager. So wear a lot of different hats. Currently, we have 2 funded staff at our partnership. So we're trying to get engaged with the communities within the Clear Creek Watershed, understand where our partners are working and how we can potentially leverage funding and resources. Also involved in education and outreach events like this. So what is a watershed? This graphic here kind of outlines what a watershed means. Basically, it's a precipitation collector. If you think about kind of a funnel, or you hear the phrase, water flows downstream, that's what a watershed is. It's the area of land that drains all the streams and precipitation to a common outlet. Watersheds can be at different scales, so they can be as small as a footprint if you make a little divot in the forest floor, or they can be regional, the western US kind of draining water into the ocean. They have different hydrologic unit codes, so the acronym for it is HUC. The Clear Creek Watershed is at HUC 8. Smaller HUC numbers mean the larger the areas. Some factors that determine how much water flows are precipitation, so that amount that falls into the watershed, infiltration, how much is absorbed within the soil and vegetation, evaporation, transpiration, evapotranspiration, and then storage. A lot of people live on the Front Range, and a lot of people need water. So there's been a lot of diversions and different water engineered like storage and pipelines to hold water for all the people that live out here. That could be a whole talk on itself about water law, but the main thing that the Watershed Forest Health Partnership is focused on is drinking water. So a lot of the partners in our partnership are drinking water utilities from Arvada, Westminster, Golden, Thornton, and then Georgetown and Idaho Springs. Those are all communities and cities, municipalities that rely on water from the watershed. So this is our watershed boundaries. Right now at this Station 2 in Evergreen, we're actually in the Upper South Platte watershed. So the Clear Creek watershed boundary follows Highway 103 or Squaw Pass Road on the southern edge. The northern edge follows Gap Road in Gilpin County and then flows through Golden and then lands in the Stanley Lake cities of Arvada, Westminster, and Thornton. And then all the way to the west, it goes to the Continental Divide. So our partnership engages in collaborative cross-jurisdictional planning and implementation of wildfire risk, mitigation, and forest health projects. Our vision is to create and promote a healthy and resilient Clear Creek watershed, some of our values listed there. And our partners involved include counties, Gilpin, Clear Creek, and Jefferson County, the fire districts, Clear Creek Fire Authority, Evergreen Fire, Timberline Fire, and then the cities of Arvada, Blackhawk, Empire, Georgetown, Golden, Westminster, Thornton, and then also all the partners that are doing work within our watershed, like Jefferson County Open Space and Jefferson Conservation District in Denver Mountain Parks. This graphic details the fire history along the Front Range. So this is looking at from 1984 to 2024, but just wanted to show kind of all the historical fires that have occurred. Evergreen and north, kind of up to Boulder, haven't really seen fires, and you can see that from all the trees that are here. There's really no gaps or openings where historical fires have occurred, so it's definitely something that is of concern, and it's kind of inevitable at this point. We do see kind of one patch within the Clear Creek watershed. I think that was the Indian Gulch fire in 2011, and then this, I don't think has the Gultra fire, but that was last year. Our watershed is 575 square miles, and it supplies drinking water to over 450,000 people in communities like Georgetown, Idaho Springs, Golden, Arvada, Westminster, and Thornton. And again, this area has not experienced a large fire, meaning over 1,000 acres, in over 150 years. That's led to all the fuel accumulation on the ground, all the regeneration, and just overly dense forest that we see. Matt talked about forest ecology and different forest types at different elevations with that elevational gradient figure. So when you go further west in the watershed, you see a lot more spruce fir and lodgepole pine dominating those high elevation areas. That ecology of those forest types would burn less frequently, but when they would burn, it would be very intense and usually larger areas. Mixed conifer and ponderosa pine dominate kind of those mid elevations, what you see in communities like Evergreen, Genesee, and areas kind of at those lower to mid elevations. Aspen are present throughout. They're one of the best kind of species that thrive after disturbances and pop back up following fire or mountain pine beetle outbreaks. So definitely promote the aspen. If I could have just one slide to sum up what our watershed group does and how to get kind of the message across, this would be it. So this is taken from Wildfire Ready Watersheds. It's a state kind of organization through the Department of Natural Resources. But what we're doing is to kind of mitigate risks to our values. So our values at risk when a wildfire does occur are things like aquatic ecosystems, our infrastructure like reservoirs, dams, municipal water intakes, agricultural water infrastructure, our roads, and then obviously our life and property and safety. Hazards following a wildfire include hill slope erosion, debris and mud flows, water quality degradation, riverine erosion and sedimentation, and then flooding that can impact kind of all all those values at risk. So with the current state of our forests, we're not likely to have kind of that low severity fire. So when we do get a fire in these areas, it will likely be severe. This means all vegetation and ground leaf litter and duff will be consumed, which means all that fuel will burn really, really hot, leading to what Jess said is hydrophobic soils. That means when there's a rainfall after a wildfire, that water is not infiltrating into the ground. There's no vegetation to hold that soil in place, and it's just going to run off at a much higher velocity, kind of bringing everything with it. All the wood, rocks, debris, mud, bringing all of that with it, and just having that really high velocity, high energy, leading to flash flooding and debris flows. So I'll go through some of the watershed impacts following these severe fires. So first we have sedimentation. This is following the Cameron Peak fire west of Fort Collins. So this is looking at hill slope erosion to streams in that Cameron Peak fire burn scar. This is within the Poudre River watershed, so there are different watersheds along the Front Range. This is again looking at sedimentation. So this was from the Hayman fire. Major sediment levels are still present in those water areas near Cheeseman Reservoir after that Hayman fire. Again, another high severity fire. This is looking at sedimentation and debris flows. So all that wood in a reservoir. This is in Strontius Springs Reservoir. I think following the Buffalo Creek fire. Yeah, and then post-fire debris flows, again, another just kind of infographic that is a bit easier to digest than just hearing all these words. But yeah, essentially after a fire, that water just kind of bringing that ash, dirt, wood, and water all the way down through that stream channel and degrading other water quality impacts. This was following the Cameron Peak fire. Again, this is looking at debris flows, and this actually affected a community in the Poudre Canyon. So this was the Black Hollow debris flow. It resulted in 4 deaths and destroyed 7 homes. I was doing research up west of Fort Collins, and the Poudre Canyon Road goes right next to the river, and seeing someone's roof in the middle of the river was pretty intense. Another one is washed out roads, so debris flows. I-70 is kind of our main vein within our watershed. Huge concern, just like I-70 had to deal with all the closures following the Grizzly Creek fire in 2020. So that is on kind of the western side of the divide, but again, could very easily happen on this side. Water quality impacts like turbidity, heavy metals, excess carbon and nutrients. So this picture was from Denver Water in their Strontius Springs Reservoir. Again, that Buffalo Creek fire, all of the down trees and debris flowed into their reservoir. Another nice infographic, just kind of detailing how wildfires can negatively impact water quality. So with all those impacts and with kind of the conversation we're having, we're trying to get the message across that it's it's a good investment to be proactive rather than reacting to some of these disasters. Proactive costs obviously are still a good amount, especially with how much things cost nowadays, but ranging from $100,000 to $1 million project. These are investing in kind of that large scale acreage in watershed health. These would include fuels reduction treatments, prescribed burns, and then other, maybe water stream restoration projects to try and reduce some of those impacts to water. If you're being reactive, the cost is going to be much higher. Wildfire suppression costs alone are extreme. Air tankers, firefighting crews, all the equipment that goes into a fire, that's upwards of millions to billions of dollars. Post-fire recovery is a cost that not many people think about, but a lot of the water utilities are involved in these forest collaboratives to reduce some of those risks to their water storage or their water infrastructure. So after a fire, Denver Water had to do a lot of sediment removal from their reservoirs, erosion control, setting up things like rock socks to try and reduce the velocity of some of those flows, and then water quality treatment, trying to increase the redundancy if one area is no longer feasible to use for drinking water, having another water treatment plant to be able to still feed people clean water. And then, side note, Denver Water has spent about $18.5 million on dredging Strontia Springs Reservoir from the Buffalo Creek fire. So that was, from 1996. It's still ongoing. There's no kind of fast-growing forest to come back following that high-severity fire. It still leads to sedimentation. Every year they get kind of those flooding, high rainfall events. So why are these watershed groups important? Well, it involves a lot of collaboration and coordination of diverse organizations to actually implement the projects. The Forest Service can only do so much, fire districts can only do so much. Trying to get everyone together to really coordinate how we can be strategic with our limited money and resources to actually make change that can be effective. We can leverage funding among organizations, so even though the water utility providers don't have land in areas west in the mountains, they can fund projects to protect their watershed and protect their water quality. Try to reduce that risk when a wildfire inevitably occurs. Again, all of our partners kind of have that shared vision to create that healthy and resilient watershed and ecosystem. Our watershed involves 3 different counties, so expanding across jurisdictional boundaries. Wildfire is not going to care about boundary lines. Again, enhancing communication and outreach across different communities. So within our watershed group, really the southern boundary involves those 4 northern plan units within Evergreen's fire district. So coming to these events and meeting some of you folks is great for increased participation. And then understanding successes and challenges in different areas. This area is much different than Gilpin County or further west in Clear Creek County, like Georgetown or Blackhawk. Future goals, so investing, improving long-term resilience of communities dependent on the watershed through these shared stakeholder planning events, supporting and promoting active management of forest health, increasing our public outreach and education related to watershed health, forest health, and fuels mitigation, and then cross-boundary collaboration to actually implement some of these projects. So how can you help? Being proactive, trying to talk early and often, looking from your home, kind of that first 5 feet, and then looking at the rest of the land you have. What are your goals? How do you want to promote a healthy acreage that you have? Defensible space around the home, again, that home ignition zone 1, and then expanding out to zones 2 and 3, hardening the home, and then supporting collaboration and what we're doing, and then community involvement. Like talking with your neighbors goes a huge way to just spread the word about what we're trying to do and kind of the risk associated with it, and then how you can help and link up some of those treatments to be more effective when a wildfire comes through. Yeah, that was about it. Thanks. I provided my name and contact info. Feel free to reach out with any other questions.
Hey everybody, my name is Michael Painter. I'm a wildlife biologist for the U.S. Forest Service. I work for the South Platte Ranger District, which is part of the Pike National Forest. Our office is just over the hill in Conifer, over there on Kings Valley Drive. I encourage anybody to come over and visit us anytime. I was invited here to speak today because the Forest Service has been a longtime partner with Evergreen Fire and JCD and Jefferson County Open Space, all the different members of the Upper South Platte Partnership, because we all have a common vision for managing this landscape that we all love so much here in the Front Range, the Upper South Platte Watershed, including the Clear Creek Watershed as well, for the long term, because we all love it. With that, let's get started. Who has a wildlife cam in their house, on their property somewhere? Wildlife cam? Yep. I'll try to strap to the back deck. Who feeds the birds in the wintertime? We all have to be bear aware out here, right? Yeah. Wildlife. That's like, I'm a wildlife biologist, so that's like 90% of the reason why I'm up here. But that's a big reason why we all live up here, why we like to recreate here, is enjoying the wildlife that we're here first and call this place home, and we want to make sure that they have a future here as well with us, right? So I just threw together a bunch of pretty pictures of wildlife. I'll talk a little bit about what each of these different photos represents. So even if you don't see your favorite bird or your favorite animal up here, I'm sorry, but there's a lot, and hopefully I've grabbed a selection that we can all relate to. So the big picture when it comes to managing our landscape for wildlife habitat, I'm taking a step back from home wildfire mitigation. I'm coming at this from a wildlife habitat perspective. When we look at the big landscape of the Front Range, the variety of landscapes that we have here, or the variety of ecosystems that we have within our landscape here, that's the key. That's what gives us wildlife diversity. Each one of these species is uniquely adapted to a particular habitat that is not the same as their neighbor. Let's see. Different species use different habitats. So here I've just grabbed a quick selection of some different species that you may or may not be familiar with. Up in the top right corner there is mountain bluebird. These guys love open forests. They are insect eaters. They nest in trees. So they need trees, but they also need an open area to forage from. So they'll perch on a branch and then they'll fly out into an open area, grab a bug, bring that back to their young in the nest in the tree. In the bottom left corner, we have a hermit thrush. Who knows what a hermit thrush sounds like? That's one of my favorite bird songs. It's the most ethereal bird song you'll ever hear. Those guys really love dense forests, and they nest on the ground. They nest in areas that have lots of shrub cover, lots of ladder fuels, like Jess was talking about. They make their home here as well. We also have animals that are specialists in the type of habitat that they use, and animals that are generalists in the kinds of habitats that we can use. Everybody loves the elk here, right? Except for when they're blocking traffic on your way to work, right? Elk are habitat generalists. They use a wide variety of ecosystem conditions. They are grazers, they eat grass. They can also eat leaves like aspen and the leaves of shrubs, Gamble's oak when it's really fresh, young leaves, they'll eat that stuff. They can survive on a lot of different things, but they need that open country to provide them with enough forage to survive. They also will use denser forested areas because they get really hot and they need that thermal protection of the more shaded conditions. They'll also calve in those more covered areas because they need that hiding cover for their young. So they're more generalists that can move all around. They actually have to move all around the landscape in order to find all the different habitat components they need to survive. Contrast that with the top right corner, which is a pine marten. Those guys are habitat specialists for dense forest, where the trees are really close together and you have a lot of deadfall, you have a lot of snags. They're predators that feed on things like wood rats and mice. They're nocturnal. They travel, they're almost arboreal, which means they travel almost exclusively through the treetops, or they'll dive in amongst all the jumble of logs and deadfall that have accumulated on the ground. You're not going to find those guys out in the middle of a meadow. That's too exposed for them. They can't hunt. That's not the kind of place where we're going to find them. So on a landscape, all of these species are native to the Front Range. They've all occurred here. They've all evolved here. They've occurred here all along. But they each find their little niche. So that's the key in managing the landscape around here, is providing different habitats. Here's where I kind of wish I had a picture of, like, cast your minds back to the first couple presentations of the historic photographs. One of the prior to the early 1800s, where you had hillsides with scattered trees and pockets of dense trees, and then think about the more modern pictures where we have photographs of just a continuous, like, rolling hills of unbroken green canopy. That's actually been a problem for our native wildlife, because species like this, mule deer, that's the top left corner up there, broad-tailed hummingbirds in the center on the top, pollinators, also like the bumblebee on the top left. All of these guys depend on the understory vegetation that grows in forest openings, out in meadows, in more open forest country. Along the bottom row here on the left is western tanager. They're also insectivores. They eat insects that are like that butterfly on the bottom right, that's a painted lady. Those insects and other pollinators are living off of the flowers and the forbs that grow in the understory, as long as the forest canopy is not too dense and shaded. So if you think about a lodgepole pine forest where you've got trees every like 10 feet and their canopy is interlocked like this, there's hardly any sunlight that reaches the forest floor, and it makes for some really nice walking. It's really easy to walk through those forests where all you have is nothing but a carpet of dead pine needles and nothing else. That does not actually support a very high diversity of wildlife species, because you're kind of missing those understory components of the primary producers, the flowers, which we call forbs, and grasses that need that light to reach the forest floor. So these guys are the ones that have been struggling while we've been so busily putting fires out for the past 150 years. So yeah, a little bit of everything, not the same thing everywhere. This top left picture is just a screenshot of Google Earth of one part of our district. You'll notice it doesn't include any homes, any structure human homes in it. But you can imagine, though, that the living amongst, getting a human component within that landscape is something that figures into the calculation of where everybody has a place to live. The top right corner, that's a screenshot from Staunton State Park. They did a really nice restoration project over there probably about 10 years ago now. In the foreground, they did some thinning. They now have a nice grass layer. It's still a forest. Everybody would go in there and anybody would call that a forest. It's got trees in it. It has higher diversity of plant species and therefore a higher diversity of wildlife species as well. And then in the bottom right, I just want to give another shout out to aspen. Aspen are the best. It's a tree. It casts shade, but the kind of shade that those trees cast is not thick enough to shade out the forest floor. Aspen themselves are a good forage, good feed for mule deer, for elk, a whole bunch of birds will forage not necessarily on the leaves, but on the insects that are eating the leaves of the aspen. And then on top of that, aspen itself is almost kind of its own fire break. So everything that we can do to encourage more aspen growth in our landscape is going to be a good thing that everybody's going to love. You and me and the wildlife, plus the aspen trees themselves. Yeah, with fire suppression, the aspen have really, really taken a hit over the last 150 years. And then that bottom left corner is just like, it looks kind of like a pretty picture, but if you have just a rolling, unbroken carpet of green conifers for miles and miles and miles, that's not giving us the landscape diversity that we really should be seeing in order to encourage the wildlife diversity that used to be here. And that is still here and is hanging on, and we gotta try to do what we can to encourage it. So just with that, I'll say thank you, and yay for aspen. If anybody wants to ask me any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, so hopefully you're picking up a little bit of our theme here, which is diversity, right? And there's a variety of levels of diversity. There are species diversity in wildlife. There's species diversity in the trees. There is age diversity in the trees. There is diversity of the vegetation and the different types of ecological systems within our fire district. Meadows, conifer, mixed conifer stands, pure ponderosa stands. We have woody shrublands, juniper stands, like especially on our kind of southeast corner, where it's a little bit drier and hotter. We've got even tiptoe up into some subalpine on our far west side. So what I want to bring this down to is a more basic level of the trees that we actually have within our fire district, most all of the trees. Aspen, as you've heard, we're all big fans, right? They have an incredibly high water content. They tend to grow in environments that need a lot of water, so it tends to be in that moisture areas. They will serve as fire breaks. They will knock fire down because they can absorb the heat, and they help to control that. They have a huge advantage in that regard. Now, to Michael's point, our forest stands of aspen are in grave danger due to our lack of fire moving through them. On that far right picture, you can see the encroachment here. Mostly it tends to be Doug fir. They are, I say kind of bluntly, they're a predatory species because they move into our aspen stands because they thrive in the same environment. And then furthermore, they thrive in that protected environment. They are a fire-dependent species. They need fire to control their numbers. Took fire out of the equation, they're running rampant through our aspen stands. Suppressing the fire has created this choke of Doug fir within our aspen stands. So you'll see some projects within our district where people are like, oh my gosh, that was a clear cut. No, that was called an aspen restoration. And that's getting rid of all of the predatory species of trees that are choking out the aspen stands, because we do know that aspen love disturbance. So when we get in there and we're taking that Doug fir out of those aspen stands, and even if a handful of aspen get cut in the process, the aspen come back in droves because they love that disturbance. They respond to it. And so that's how in many forestry work situations where we're restoring aspen stands, again, chemo is not pretty, but it gives us longevity of our aspen stands. Another one I threw in here, you find it in a lot of our riparian drainage areas, mostly in our kind of northwest pockets. Rocky Mountain maple, it's the highest maple, grows at the highest elevation maple. Again, deciduous, keep it cleaned up around it, love it. Black willow and cottonwood, you see them in our bigger drainages. I had plenty of time today, parked on 73 going south. Willow and cottonwood, all the way down Kittredge, North Turkey Creek, you get a lot of the willow and cottonwood. Ponderosa pine. Ponderosa pine are our favorite of our conifer trees because they are a fire resilient tree. They were designed, as you saw in my previous slides, to have fire move around them. They are a tree that is comfortable with fire. You can tell because they have nice thick bark. They have browse that are very open. So when there are embers falling, the embers, just like snowfall, will fall through the ponderosa. They are not an easily ignitable tree. They're dead branches, and I'll say the caveat, when healthy, a ponderosa will naturally shed its dead branches. Again, trying to suppress the likelihood of fire moving up into the canopy. They are designed to have fire move around them when healthy. And we're gonna have Mike Goldblatt come up in a minute and go into a little greater detail on why our ponderosa are also becoming a problem. Doug fir, like I said, they're kind of a thorn in our side because they are such an aggressively populating tree. They are a tree that was designed to have fire mitigate their numbers. When Doug fir are young, and some of what I'm going to say on Doug fir also holds true for spruce, just so you know. But when you go to a young Doug fir, it has no bark. It's just skin. And there are all these little pustules on that. Now, if you take your fingernail and you pop one of those pustules, it's the tree's resin. Those pustules are designed to break when there's a ground fire. So a natural lightning strike fire would hit, ground fire's moving around, it's coming in here to young Doug firs, it's going to pop those pustules, the resin coats the tree. Now also, we're looking at dense browse, easier to catch embers, also far more ignitable. Think of if you crumble a piece of paper versus leaving a piece of paper flat, it's a lot easier for crumbled paper to ignite. Denser browse, all the way down to the ground. And they do not shed their dead branches. Their dead branches hang to capture ground fire. These pustules pop, coat the tree in resin. The intent was to ignite that tree fully. Burn it up, mitigate the numbers. So that this didn't happen. You would allow one or two healthy Doug firs would survive those natural ground fires. That's not the case anymore. And so they are overtaking. A very small Doug fir will drink more water than a ponderosa pine that's 3 to 5 times its size. They're water hogs and very aggressive in their growth rates. Very similar ecologic issues with spruce. They are, that too, right? Same. Blue spruce and Engelmann spruce are our most common spruce species in Evergreen Fire District. A lot of spruce people will misidentify as Doug fir. Trick, friendly fir, spiky spruce. Spruce are spiky, fir are soft. Blue spruce will adjust their coloration based on genetics, based on environment. The blue silver coloration is born of the waxy coating that's on the needles. And so you can find blue spruce that are not blue or silver at all. And so that's where people get them confused quite a bit. The Engelmann spruce, those are the big guys that you see mostly down some of our drainages and then at higher elevation. Lodgepole pine. Lodgepole pine are one of our tricky, most problematic species. They are designed to burn by every intent of the word. They are a tree that was designed by Mother Nature at those high elevations for full stand replacement, meaning fire would come through and every single tree would burn to the ground. Their design is for fire to help open their cones. Now they're evolving out of that thanks to climate chaos, but they have very thin bark. I mean, think about it. You hop on one of the social media pages, who's selling firewood? Lodgepole pine. Grab it up. Why? Because it's designed to burn. They do not shed their dead branches, they hang them. Again, capturing that fire and trying to pull it up into the canopy, rip all the way through the stand. They grow densely, very close together. They are a problematic tree. They are designed for full stand replacement every 50 to 100 years. All of our lodgepole are past their live-by date. All of them. They have expired. They are becoming even more problematic. And that, again, I'm laying the groundwork to build into some of the issues that we are dealing with. When fire isn't allowed to do its job, Mother Nature will. With or without us, with or without fire, she will figure out a way for this 50 to 100 year stand replacement to happen. They are definitely one of our more problematic trees because of the way they also grow. When we are doing these mitigation projects within the community, we are trying to mimic nature. Okay? Again, aggressively so in some cases because we are on a shortened time span. We are so far behind the 8 ball and the safety of our lives and our community is at risk. With lodgepole in particular, if we mimic nature, it's a clear cut because that's what Mother Nature designed. 50 to 100 year full stand replacement. Every single one goes down and then they start over. So with this, because of their design, they become a very problematic tree to mitigate because you can't just pick every handful of tree within a lodgepole stand. One, they're all on their way out as it is right now. They are self-selecting death because they need that 50 to 100 year stand replacement. But they also are very accustomed to growing together. So when you start pulling holes out of them, first light breeze, the rest of them go down. They need strength in numbers because they are designed to live and die together. They don't like to be mitigated. It doesn't work well. So then what also happens in that top right picture, you can see, those Doug fir are happy to come in. And that helps that lodgepole forest burn even hotter and faster. Now we've got a nuked soil. Again, going back to that hydrophobic soil, the sediment runoff in forests like this is absolutely catastrophic, as Kelby noted. Another issue that we have, shrub, tree, all depends on how you prune it, are the Gambella oaks. These are, you'll find them, they're starting to creep higher and higher into our district. Again, climate chaos. We are not staying cold enough, long enough over our winter durations. So these oak brushes are being allowed to migrate up in elevation. They're all the way up into Three Sisters now. I've seen them in Three Sisters. Primarily, they are in our southeast corner, the High Drive area, a lot in Morrison. They are obviously a hardwood deciduous tree. The problem with them, specifically with fire, obviously it's just a lot of cluttered fuel, but in particular their leaves are incredibly woody. And that density of leaf litter, when it ignites, lofts tremendously well as a very well-lit, established ember. So they become very problematic in that potential of creating a conflagration fire. Arch nemesis number 1, juniper. We have primarily 3 types of juniper within our fire district. The traditional juniper tree is our Rocky Mountain juniper. That's a tree. What we really love are those ornamental juniper that litter our communities, because landscapers figured out a plant that you can't kill, it doesn't mind drought, and grows prolifically wherever it wants to. Ornamental junipers. You can see this one cut in half. Does that look at all flammable to you?
Just a tad.
Just a little bit, right? Just a scotch. We also have common ground, like a creeping juniper. Those are found, those are a native juniper within our forest. You tend to find them a lot in areas of ponderosa pine and kinnick. Those 3 species work really well together and coexist very nicely within our forest, in native areas of our forest. That bottom right is the reason why juniper is not to be had near a structure. We don't recommend juniper within 100 feet of a structure, because in the fire service we call them little green gas cans. The reason you cannot kill them, the reason they are so drought tolerant, is that the resin within them is so concentrated. It is incredibly volatile. You can see that it creates a wonderful bed for embers, because we all know none of us are getting underneath it to clean it out. It just accumulates dead debris, dies from the inside out, so it looks green on the outside, but it's dying on the inside, and the resin within it is so volatile, one ember and it will blow. It will create enough heat to blow the windows out. If it's within, depending on the wind, it can be 20 feet from your house, and it can still blow out a window just based on that radiant heat impact. So, as we've gone through, these are some of our primary species of trees that we have. Much higher up, we get some native limber pine as well. There are a ton of ornamental pinyon pine. For some reason, my neighborhood, like the developer, it's full of pinyon pine, but they were ornamentally placed. Scots pine, Austrian pines, they are all more or less leaning, of those ornamental pines, Scots, Austrian, and pinyon, they lean a little closer to ponderosa than any of the spruce or fir, obviously. Lodgepole pine are their own separate little hot mess. And then, like I said, there's some ornamental bristlecone pine around as well that are very similar to limber pine. But what we have to look at, again, is a lot of this is about species diversity. Creating diversity across our landscapes as far as density, diversity of species, diversity of landscape scale treatments. Because what we are seeing and what we know to be happening is that without that diversity, with that unhealthy, close proximity, overpopulated stands, Like I said, we took Mother Nature's tool of fire away. She said, hold my beer. I'm coming in hot, and I'm gonna come in hot with disease and infestation. So I'd like to introduce Mike Goldblatt for all the bad stuff. Thank you.
So, yeah, if you could advance when I.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jess called me yesterday and I'm filling in for a Forest Service guy, right? So, don't really have anything prepared except for my little notes I just took. But I'm just gonna look at, the screen and kind of just riff off of what I see. And, I got plenty to talk about, but I'll try to keep it to 15 minutes. So, let's talk about aspen for a second. So, in the landscape here in Evergreen, where there's a lot of population, I planted a lot of aspen, and it's not my favorite. It's great at higher altitudes and in a forest situation, but down here I just find I was planting them and then coming back and removing them because it's just a different environment here. They get a lot of different diseases. I think you got a slide. Yeah, there is a slide. So on the right-hand side, we got a fungus, Marsanita leaf blight. There's about 6 other leaf blights they get. Some of you guys, if you have aspen in this area, you'll see the leaves turning black this time of year, especially in a wet June like this. And then you get aphids on there. The aphids secrete honeydew, then the ants come in, it gets canker, cytospora canker, and it's not a great plant in this environment, but like you said, forest-wise and fire break-wise, they're great as long as you're 8,000 feet or above, roughly.
And that's where, again, it comes back to when, aspen do not like to be planted. They don't. They are very fickle. They are very finicky. You go buy one at Home Depot, you bring it, you try and plant it. 2 out of 3 times they're going to die. They're going to end up, with some sort of blight. Blight's kind of a generic term for all the various funguses that can happen with aspen. And the reality is that we need to support our existing native aspen rather than trying to transplant, rather than trying to force that growth. We need to support the ones that already exist and give them proper environments, because when we put them into these more sterile environments, again, that lack of diversity, that lack of forest disturbance, that lack of natural fire, whatever the case may be, this is where you start to get these fungal infestations, especially in our aspen. And because of how aspen grow, they share their fungus very fast. So you'll wipe out an entire aspen stand if you're not maintaining it in a diverse fashion.
Yeah, so let's not spend too much time on aspen. I gotta get to the good stuff. Well,
The good
okay,
stuff.
well, we're gonna get to the pine beetle, which is a big issue right now, but just a couple other minor things. On the left is Cooley spruce gall. It's an adelgid that people think they're pine cones, very typically. That's that when they're brown and they look like pine cones, that's where they left from. So that's like last year or the year before. Right now, the buds on spruce trees are turning into those galls like we see hanging down there, and that's where the aphids live, inside these chambers. And they can debilitate a spruce tree. They actually have 2 hosts. They fly to a fir tree, have part of their life cycle there, then back to the spruce, and they just take that new growth and turn it into a little housing project for the aphids, and turn brown. And it's mostly aesthetics. If it gets real bad, my company by the way, so I started Lam Tree in 1978 and sold it about 10 years ago. So when I was in the commercial tree business, we would spray for that, but only if it got really bad and the customer thought their tree was turning brown and didn't want it to be brown. So it's mostly aesthetics. What do we got over on the other side, Jeff?
It's the older version
Oh.
after it's died back.
Okay.
And so just so you know, like little insectology 101 is that a gall is the house of an insect when it has some sort of host. In this case, these are spiky galls. You'll see like round ones that are usually, they're really smooth, almost look like a malt ball. Those are usually wasp galls, and it's where the wasp has stung the tree and the gall forms around it, and it's a little woody ball. So that's, gall is a generic term that happens from an insect infestation on, generally speaking, it's a woody vegetation.
Okay, so on the left is spruce budworm in the caterpillar stage. Again, right now, well, they're starting to turn into moths. But roughly the early part of June, they'll get on the new growth rather, of Doug firs and spruces, even though it's called spruce budworm. Much more common around here on fir trees because there's just so many more of them. They get on that new growth, the same growth that those delegates were turning into galls, that real nice light green, tasty, soft growth. They'll get on there and just eat it, just like in that picture. So that budworm there, that's probably in the second week of June or so. He's eating that new growth. He's going to then turn into a moth and lay eggs and get those eggs ready for the next season. Again, it's more debilitating than the spruce gall in that it will eat the new growth, but if there's enough of them, entire mountainsides can get quite defoliated. Then the Doug fir beetle comes in a lot and finishes them off. So it is a problem, way more than the gall, and there's plenty of it around the state. If you drive into the mountains, you'll see a lot. In the 1980s, this is an interesting myth. So if any of you guys were here in the 80s, people think that there used to be helicopters flying above, dropping Bacillus thuringiensis. It was a biological treatment, you remember. And so helicopters would come across. I'd be spraying from the ground with hydraulic sprayers, but helicopters, if you can believe it, would drop insecticide from the air over our neighborhoods. And so people to this day say, oh, I remember when the beetles were really bad in the 80s and the helicopters came, but it was for spruce budworm. And you gotta, again, catch it about the second or third week of June when they're in that stage and they're vulnerable to the spray. Once they're a moth, they're not vulnerable to any insecticide treatments. So, yeah. Oh, and on the right-hand side, it showed like that's how they could, in a bad situation, they could defoliate a forest like that. Okay, dwarf mistletoe. So it's a parasitic plant that attaches itself to ponderosa pines. It also will attack lodgepoles and other conifer species, but around here it's really bad. Right in this neighborhood, Highwan is loaded with dwarf mistletoe. Again, it debilitates the tree to the point where it can die over the course of decades, but it can also weaken the tree so that the pine beetles love weak trees from dwarf mistletoe. So it's hard to treat. When I used to be in the commercial aspect, we would sometimes trim it out if it was in the early stages. Sometimes they came up with a spray called Florel, that it's a fruit eliminator that we would try to like sharpshoot the mistletoe out of the trees. It had a moderate effect, but mostly we would try to remove the worst trees so that the healthier ones didn't. They'll fly actually at like 60 miles an hour around late August or so, Labor Day maybe, and just shoot into neighboring trees and within itself, and it spreads that way. So it's a very slow killer of trees or weakener of trees.
The big issue that we see with dwarf mistletoe, and it is rampant across our entire community, the way you have to think about it, so these spores attach to the tree, and then they hypersteroid pull resources to where they've attached. So you're going to see, and so some of the ways that you can see them, it looks like burnt orange coral on the tree. But what will happen, you've heard witches' brooms, the thatching on the trees gets incredibly aggressive. So it hypersteroids the growth. Now, where this becomes problematic from us from a fire perspective, and I'll refer back to when I was discussing ponderosa pine in particular, ponderosa pine are designed to shed their dead branches. But once dwarf mistletoe is in a ponderosa stand, it's systemic. It is throughout the entire stand. Whether a tree is showing it or not, And so what happens is that steroid effect that the dwarf mistletoe creates increases the fibrosity of the tree itself. It no longer is shedding its dead branches. So that's why you are starting to see more and more of our ponderosa pine still holding their dead branches. In addition, that hypergrowth is creating that denser thatching. So now those embers are not going to fall through, same as the snow. That's why you get more hazard trees now with the ponderosa pine, whether it's heavy snowfall or wind throw, because that thatching is so thick, wind or snow hits it and it's just going to push that over, the pine over like it was a wall. In addition, all that hypergrowth creates hypergrowth of that needle bed all the way around the tree. So even if we did have a natural fire move in, it's going to hit that density of needle growth and it will kill the tree at the base because it will be so hot and volatile just around with that needle growth. So dwarf mistletoe is probably, I think, even though trees can live for 30 years with it, well mitigated, well maintained, in a healthy, non-competitive resource environment, meaning it's not clogged up with a whole bunch of other trees. However, you have to stay on top of it. And dwarf mistletoe, Mike alluded to it, that it is a species-specific dwarf mistletoe. So a ponderosa that has dwarf mistletoe will only transmit to another ponderosa, but there is lodgepole dwarf mistletoe, there is fir dwarf mistletoe. We just don't have a lot of those two here. As Mike said too, these spores can shoot out 30, 40, 50 feet at 60 miles an hour. So ponderosa pine, as we've seen throughout the evening, they were designed for open stands, park-like ponderosa. Old historic photographs show men 6 horses abreast riding through ponderosa stands. That spacing made it harder for dwarf mistletoe to latch on and move through our stands. But because we're overstocked, we're overcrowded, look right outside our window, the ponderosa are intertwined. That dwarf mistletoe moves quickly and over and over and over again. New infestation every single season now. When our trees, and Mike also spoke to it specifically with spruce budworm, but when our trees are stressed, resource competing, dealing with systemic infestations, they send out pheromones. They send out hormones. It's like ringing the dinner bell. I'm stressed. Mother Nature, hello, fire, no. Dwarf mistletoe, nope. So now what are we dealing with?
Okay, the main course here. This is what everybody's concerned. Just a little backstory. So again, going back to when I started Lam Tree in 1978, it was in the middle of a big pine beetle outbreak here on the Front Range. Everybody kind of knows about what happened up in Summit, Grand Eagle counties around the turn of the century. Those were lodgepole pines. And you saw, if you've been to the mountains at all, mountainsides gone everywhere. So down here in the 70s and 80s, it was similar, but not as, it wasn't as dramatic, let's put it that way, because we have more diversity. That's a monoculture over there of 100 and whatever year old, same species lodgepole, just like you talked about with fire. They should be burned, so they're all the same species, same age, and the beetle came up through there and just loved it. They just destroyed it. Here we have more diversity, and the ponderosa pines got hit. So if you had a 1 acre lot in Highwan here, typically if you had 50 trees, a lot of people lost 10, 15 trees, but they're just not going to kill all of your trees. So I tell people don't get too, excited about losing all your trees, but you're going to lose trees. If you have a stand of ponderosas here, very good chance you're going to lose trees in the next 5 to 10 years, possibly a lot of trees. I've been monitoring this just as a retired arborist. I drive around and I've been seeing it. So I've been saying since 2020 that it's coming, and we'll have some slides coming up. I'll show you a little bit of the progression. But so on the left-hand side, that's the blue stain fungus that is it basically is what kills the tree. There's some argument among scientists, does the blue stain kill it, or does the boring frass inside the galleries, which you can see galleries in the middle slide. But I've had some long discussions about that. But let's put it this way, the blue stain is the main culprit, and it's a fungus that they carry on their back. It gets into the xylem wood there, which basically they really got into all the xylem wood there, and a little bit more. And that'll choke off the water take-up of the trees. And the tree will die on a 1-year cycle. They're gonna fly, and this again is another debate people have. I'm gonna stand by the main, if I had to guess when they're gonna fly, it would be the first week of August. Some people say you gotta spray your trees by July 10th. That's just my opinion from almost 50 years of watching these guys. So whether it's late July or early August, they're gonna fly into neighboring trees, maybe on an exponential rate of, I was telling you once, 3 to 4 per tree, like, and Jess was saying maybe she's heard 8 or 10. So it's somewhere in that range. So if you have one tree that has pine beetle and you don't get it down by end of next month, you're probably gonna have 5 more per tree that you left standing. So real important to get them down before the flight, and then they'll fly them. So the middle slide is that's the colonization. So they're making galleries, and you can see the white grubs. Those are the larvae. They came from it was an egg when it got in after the adult laid the egg. That's the larvae. They're going to pupate and turn into black adults. I don't know if we got any on that slide, but they're going to turn black and grow wings and fly like at the end of July or early August and complete that 1-year cycle. It starts over with 5 or 10 times the number of trees. That's why what you're seeing out on these mountainsides. So I saw, well, let's jump up ahead slide,
Yep,
and then we
yep.
can come back to the pitch tubes. So like, you can see the 2 trees on the left, that was up Upper Bear Creek Road, somewhere near the wildlife area. I might have taken that picture like, I don't know, 3 years ago, and I saw 2 trees. I was like, oh, well, pine beetle up here. And the other one is on Kerr Gulch like a few weeks ago. And so we're jumping ahead a few years, but you can see it went from 2, these are 2 different areas, but they'll go from 2 to 10 to 50 to 100. If any of you guys are driven up by Idaho Springs on the east edge of town, the first Idaho Springs exit on the north side of the highway, it went from 1 to 10 to 100 to 500 in the last few years. And just on that one mountainside, right across from that Forest Service office up there. So yeah, exponential growth. And that's why, even though we're not seeing it that much, 2025 in the next few weeks, they're turning gold right now, and just in the next week or 2, not the brown ones that you see, they're just turning gold, and they're going to turn, well, there's the gold color I'm talking about. They're turning that color right now, and it's just going to blow up in the next few weeks, and forget about 2026. It's going to be bad going forward from that. So let's go back to the pitch tubes. So that's your first sign usually. If you're wondering if your trees have pine beetle, that's usually the first sign people will see. That's the beetles going into the trunk in mass. They need thousands, at least many hundreds to attack the tree successfully. It has to be a mass attack. So that's the insect getting in there, and the tree is pushing sap out to try to reject it. Sometimes the tree wins the battle, but if there's enough beetles, the tree's not going to win the battle. They get in there, and if they have a few thousand of them on a large tree, it's going to typically be a successful attack. So okay, yeah, right. I forgot we had these pheromone packs on
Some
the left.
options.
Yeah.
Some silver lining to the
Yeah,
dark.
we got a couple of new. Okay, so before I get to these 2 methods, the historic method is coating the trunks with hydraulic sprayers. I did way too much of that and got all this nasty chemical on me in the early days. We used to use this stuff called Carbaryl 7. People have heard of it. Now we're using more chrysanthemum derivatives like bifenthrin. And a little better, but it's still environmentally not super safe. Any insecticide is poisonous. So that's the standard way prophylactically treat the tree. If a beetle comes, it senses the chemical, either dies or goes elsewhere. So that's what we've been doing. It still goes on. I do recommend you do it. It's very effective, but you got to keep in mind that you're spraying a poison into the air. So these two methods here are relatively new. I'm hearing a lot of people talk about the pheromone packs. A pheromone is just a secretion, in this case verbenone, that the tree, that these packs will make the beetles think that tree is full. The hotel's full, go somewhere else. So it just tells them go elsewhere. And in my opinion, and I've studied this a bit, it's a good secondary defense. Like if you spray your trees or inject it on the right, which I'll talk about in a minute if I have enough time, it's a secondary defense. Like you could do a perimeter or put them on individual trees. But if you just do that and go, gosh, I did an environmentally safe thing and my trees aren't going to get hit, I wouldn't count on it. It's a tool, but not a first line of defense, in my opinion. So, relatively new science, and the reason I'm kind of out of retirement is I'm working with a company, Mountain Family Tree Service, and I'm kind of heading up the injection thing that we're doing. So there's an insecticide called emamectin benzoate, and what we do now, and that's us doing it just last week. Where were we? Somewhere up, it was outside on Pleasant Park Road. There's some really big pondos. That's a 30-inch diameter PBH tree. And what we're doing now is we're injecting it into the lowest part of the tree. The tree will take it up over the course of, it takes about 2 weeks usually, depending on the moisture content. It'll take it up and gets the insecticide into the xylem wood of the tree. And if a beetle gets in there, it's not going to be a successful attack. It's relatively new science, 10 years of studies on it. There's been some good science work on it. And I'm a believer in it, and it's very relatively way safer than blasting insecticides into the air. Although it's got efficacy, both do. I believe that what I've read about this, it's going to work, and I'm really promoting it. And people, it's much more expensive than spraying the trees, but I'm finding when I tell people a price that I think is high, they're like, okay. So people are environmentally conscious, especially I think around here, and that's a new science that we're trying to get people to use.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, you bet.
So as we come, we've got two more speakers here, and what we want to highlight with this is some of what kind of brought this presentation together was there is a ridiculous amount of misinformation within this community, and that is impacting some of our work, some of our partners' work. And to be incredibly blunt, I take that very personally, because when people take things out of context and cherry pick research that I can say comes from individuals that I know personally, I take umbrage with it. The work that we are doing, all of us that work in any sort of forest health, fire mitigation work, first and foremost, I can promise you none of us are getting rich. But also, I can also attest to all of the individuals that have presented here tonight. We all got into this because we have an incredibly strong environmental drive. Our degrees are in environmental sciences, forestry, ecology, biology. Our passion is built on longevity of our ecological systems. And so with that, I would like to bring up our Jefferson County Open Space Forester. Let's get you started here.
Awesome. Hi everyone, my name is Tony Aichello. I'm one of the Natural Resources team leads at Open Space. So I am in charge of our forestry program and our noxious weed program. I'm going to fly through my slides here. We might have a little bit of time for questions at the end of all of this. A big thing, my theme of my presentation, if you have questions, go to the website. All of these slides will have the website. My business card has our website on the back of it. We have put a ton of information, including a longer version of Matt's presentation, and a link to a lot of our partners. So if you have questions, go to our website. There's a ton of information. Starting in 2 weeks, July 7th, we will be working at Beaver Ranch in the 2 purple sections. So about 86 acres there. Really excited about this project. Not only did we get Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Plan money, so co-swap. So this was seen as a state priority. Denver Water came up with quite a bit of funding for this as well. This is right at the top of Foxton Creek. This was incredibly important to Denver Water that this project got done. So Jeffco, Jefferson County Open Space, is only paying 18% of the project costs on this. So we're getting a massive return on our investment for the community and for water protection with this project. So we're really excited about that. Flying J work, kind of a third rail up here a little bit sometimes. This summer, we are going back to clean up some of the blowdown that we have experienced in the park. Like we talked about, you do a patch cut near Lodgepole, you're going to get some blowdown next to it. The blowdown is something we've had at a couple of our parks. It is to be expected with forest management, but that we've heard loud and clear from the public that it's highly undesirable for that to be out there. We're balancing it a little bit with the wildlife. We don't want to take down all of our blowdown. Again, diversity, very important. We need some blowdown, but we are going to clean up some of it. I swear I didn't scheme too much with the people coordinating before me, but we are actually going to focus on a lot of aspen enhancement after that at Flying J. Flying J is not known for its aspen yet. But all throughout it, we call it the ghosts of aspen, where you see these old aspen stands that are just completely filled with lodgepole or Douglas fir, like Jess was talking about. We think we have funding. It's through FEMA, so but for some work in 2027, that is going to be ponderosa pine thinnings. So the purple areas is what we're going to do. The like white or beige is what we did in 2020. Also coming up is Meyer Ranch Park. I love this. I had someone at the CWPP meeting come up to me and say, you know, what happened at Meyer Ranch? And I got kind of into my defensive mode, like, well, we were helping. He said, okay, well, when are you going to do the rest? We're coming to do the rest. We have this on our calendar for next year. I think it's going to have to be pushed back one more year. We've got some really, really cool understory plants in there. So stuff that grows on the ground. And we want to make sure that our forestry work is taking all of that into consideration. But pretty large work at Meyer Ranch. And that's another co-swap project that we're actually working on with Jefferson Conservation District, Denver Mountain Parks, and Conifer Wildland. So a really exciting project there. This winter, we are starting Lookout Mountain Nature Center. We're going to do it when no one's up there doing their weddings and stuff. So about 85 acres-ish, mostly roadside work and stuff like that. I tried to pick a little bit less scary map than this one. This is the Evergreen CWPP priority project maps. 3 of our projects made it in there. They're all at Alderfer. I don't know if anyone's noticed, there's a couple burn piles in the back. We counted it over 38 acres. We have about a little over 1,000 piles. We were hoping to get a lot of those burned this past winter. We weren't able to get that done. We now have all the permits and the certs and everything lined up, so we're going to begin that as soon as we get enough snow and start working on that. We're coordinating very closely with Evergreen Fire. It's not just a bunch of goofballs out there lighting fires. This is a highly regulated, highly controlled thing that we are doing with the fire department. I want to re-emphasize the fire department's part of it. Professional fire department, yeah. Also, 2 projects at Alderfer, 3 Sisters. These aren't in the books yet, but it was identified in the CWPP, so this is something Jeffco is looking at really intensely. We did a lot of work 2 years ago on the north side of Buffalo Park, about 260 acres of treatment up there. Kind of the same thing. We heard a lot of, hey, what about south of Buffalo Park? What about Evergreen Mountain? We've got this huge lodgepole stand out there. So we are looking into treating down there. That's going to be another complex project, so we don't have anything scheduled yet. And then mountain pine beetle work, we've noticed the exact same thing as Mike. We've been monitoring and treating this since the open space started, but really since 2000 we've seen another big uptick, and we're trying to get ahead of this as much as we can. Whole bunch of parks in 2025 we treated at. Just for example, Elk Meadow, we did 14 acres of treatment there last year internally. This year it got even bigger. We've got a lot of pressure from the neighbors and stuff like that around there. So we did 23 acres just at Elk Meadow. We're also we call it chasing spot fires in the pine beetle realm, but where just little pockets of trees are popping up, we're attacking those. Like we talked about, Pondo has that thick bark. It's really hard to get at the beetles. So what that basically involves is a more difficult chainsaw peeling the tree 2 inches at a time. So we've put over 500 hours of very, very laborious work into that to try to get these little mountain pine beetle spot fires throughout our park system. And we've actually we've requested more seasonals for next year, and we're even looking at shifting our work schedule to better time up with attacking the beetles and not getting so many college kids on break and stuff. A little bit of a trade-off there, but we'll see how it goes. Oh, and that is the only QR code that's different. That takes you to the Jefferson County Mountain Pine Beetle website on the Jefferson County Open Space. So our county weed and pest coordinator has a fantastic website about that. And again, if you have any questions at all, please go to our website. All right, we've got Coleman coming up next.
I don't have a presentation. Sorry, I was just going to chat with y'all and kind of, give you an update on what Denver Mountain Parks is doing, kind of the stepchild of Jefferson County Open Space.
Do you have a website?
We have a website. Yeah, it gets updated sometimes. We've got a good story map on there. I'm Coleman, Lowry, the forester for Denver Mountain Parks. Some of our current projects we've got going on now are in coordination with our partners you've heard from already. Won't try to take too much of your time, but we're doing some work at Berrien Mountain on the Eagle Cliff side, Eagle Cliff Road side. That's probably in Conifer's Wildland district, so none of you folks, but some of the stuff we're also doing in Berrien in Evergreen is on Armadillo Trail. We've got Mile High Youth Corps just started there with chainsaw crews again. We've got 15 more weeks of them. They're doing good work there. What else do we have? We got thousands of piles throughout Evergreen's district that we need to burn, and my boss, Andy Perry, has just received his RXP3, so his burn boss certification, so we're going to really hit the ground running this winter when the snow flies and all the, all the factors line up in our favor. We're going to definitely ask Jess for some help in that as well, but we've got a lot of qualified firefighters that that will be able to light piles in a safe manner. Other projects we've got going on right now is the Workforce Road project. It's kind of on pause right now, but we've got another 14 weeks of Mile High Youth Corps crews working in there to bolster the egress evacuation route on South Workforce Road. What else? We just finished up 70 acres at Stanley Park off of Mountain Parks Drive and Stanley Park Road. They're still chipping the slash and getting the meadow all cleaned up from our log deck there, but that's all finished up. We're pretty proud of that. So it's a little conservation park for us. What else do we have? Those are the big projects we have this summer. If you have questions or live near Denver Mountain Parks land, feel free to grab me after this and I'll give you a card, and we've got a website. I've got an email address, so bug me if you want to, so thank you.
All right, so we are closing up with our presentations. I am happy to field questions, and then if I can't answer them, I will obviously punt it to whoever is more appropriate. Do we have any questions? Rob?
We do some community slash shipping in the fall, and I'm wondering if sometimes we chip back on the ground. Does that attract pine beetles to the area when we do that?
No, because it dries out so quickly. The pine beetle need that intact trunk to be able to go into. Log decks can be problematic, so if you're dropping logs and leaving them intact, so if you are doing that, we always recommend bucket up as fast as possible. Cut it, split it, get it dried out as fast as possible so it's not as appealing. If you're gonna leave them in log decks, either treat them, tarp them, there's a couple of different options that you can do, but chip is not an issue. Yes, sir.
We've got a bunch of ponderosa pines with various stages of the mistletoe. Is it constructive to get up and cut the branches off or just cut out the section?
It's kind of like Band-Aiding a tumor. Aesthetically, it helps. It does help in potential spread. If you're cutting, areas that were actively ready to spore and you're removing that, you're reducing, one more burst of spores being introduced into that stand. But unfortunately, like I said, it is systemic. Once it is in a tree, it's in. Once it's in a stand, it's there. It's more about mitigating the resource competition of that tree and keeping that tree as happy and healthy as possible so it can live with it. It's going to have some maybe aesthetic issues periodically, but if you give it proper, natural, good spacing, it's got plenty of nutrients and water, you're going to reduce the likelihood of increasing that spread, if that makes sense.
Yes, I would add something like,
Yeah.
so it's basically a 7-year cycle. So when you see the growth like the picture showed, that's 5, 6, or 7 years in when they're starting to seed like that. But you'll have branches that will just start getting swollen right year 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you're just cutting out the visible plant, there's the earlier years are still going to turn into that. So you're never getting, even if you took out all the visible mistletoe, you wouldn't get it all. It's just you're delaying it. And I think that's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. The bigger the tree, the longer they can typically live with it, because they're bigger, they're able to pull enough of their own resources and feed the mistletoe infestation. Smaller trees tend to dodge the bullet of the sporing assault. They'll still get it. I always say it's more of those adolescent, teenage, kind of mid-generation trees. They get absolutely annihilated, and then they become this host body that really projects out because they're not strong enough to fight off the infestation, so the infestation just goes rampant.
I just want to say one more thing about, it was alluded to a little bit about the tree diseases, the fungal infections, the mistletoe, the beetles. All of these species, mistletoe, pine beetle, even the crud that the aspen get, those are all native species that these forests evolved with. The issue that we're dealing with now actually still goes back to that whole fire suppression action that we've been taking for 150 years. So the fire that was maintaining the forest, not only for the regular fire regime, was also keeping all of these forest pests in check. Because mistletoe is food for wildlife, pine beetles is food for wildlife. So we're in an imbalance in the insects and the bugs and crud that evolved with these forests with fire. And by taking the fire out of the ecosystem the way we have, we've thrown everything off balance. So all of these mechanical treatments that are being proposed for around the neighborhoods and even out into the wildland, that's also an effort to get the bugs and crud back in check as well.
That's exactly right, yes.
So if we're seeing that increase in stuff that birds and wildlife eat. Why are we not seeing like more wildlife? Like with all those pine beetles that we're seeing more of, why are we not seeing more birds with that?
Lack of
Right.
diversity.
We're overwhelming what the animals can eat, essentially. Like, and pine beetles, again, the climate change figures in, or climate chaos figures into that as well. Whereas mountain pine beetle used to have only one brood a year. Now, if our summers are long enough and warm enough, they can have 2 broods in a year, and basically you're overwhelming the birds and the bats and all the things that eat those bugs. You're overwhelming their capacity to consume those. Again, it's an out of balance thing.
And that greater picture of that homogeous
Yep.
forest stand is reducing not only the diversity of, prey and foraging opportunities and everything, but just habitat. The habitat has become a monoculture that diversity is what it all really comes back to, right? For all levels in this regard to maintain the checks and balances. Yeah. It's there's so much woven into our ecological systems here. And I mean, at the heart of it, really, it is about diversity to maintain those balances. And we are so out of skew right now at all of those various levels. Clint?
Is there a rule of thumb for how many pitch tubes you can have on a tree that otherwise looks healthy? If there's just a couple?
I would say, well, first of all, if you see like really wet ones, it could be like a lot of them. You go, oh my God, look at those big globs. That could be a push out. What you want to look for is a lot of them, and like starting to have dry ones, smaller ones that are dry looking, and sawdust in the bark crevices and at the base. But the big globs, if there's 20 big globs, I won't cut that tree down until I'm sure it fades around this time of year. So small, dry, sawdusty is what you're looking for.
Again, a healthy tree that has all of the resources it needs, they do have the ability to fight them off.
Right.
And so it is really hard to tell until the tree starts showing symptoms.
Okay.
This time of year, look for that bull, like he's talking about those golden eagles, telltale sign.
You could also take a hatchet and look for blue stain. Starting April, May-ish, like they won't have blue stain early in the winter, but at this time of year, if you took a hatchet, just took a little piece, got into the xylem wood, you would see that blue stain that I showed on that one.
Because it starts at the outside and works its way in, so it would be evident on the outer edges. Thought I saw a hand over here, but yes.
Yeah, so you said their mountain pine beetle are actually potentially doing 2 life cycles now because of the.
They can. It depends on the year.
Okay. Because last year, or in January, we did a fire mitigation project up on Bear Mountain, which included, limbing some of the lower limbs of some trees, which can attract pine beetle, and so that's typically why we recommend, doing that sort of thing October through February, if at all possible. But it was January, we limbed some trees, it was a healthy tree. We came back, I don't know, later this year, you've already been there, so I guess it was like May, and that tree had pine beetle. So it's pretty interesting.
And again, it's the reality of the climate chaos. Our weather cycles are no longer as traditional and predictable as what our environment was designed to handle. And that's, again, I see it, mostly in the aspen. I think they're the most obvious kind of canary in the coal mine of it because they need those deep, cold winters, and we don't have that anymore, right? We have January, where we have those potentially really incredibly warm Januaries, and that becomes problematic, and it's causing these challenges to these trees, and they're stressed. And again, like I said, when they're stressed, they're ringing the dinner bell. They are going to start self-selecting. The pine beetle infestation, lodgepole just as a whole, they're starting to self-select. And so much of the work that we're doing is to try and get ahead of this. I mean, we are trying to patch holes on a Titanic, right? but we're trying. And that's where, you know, we really want to work to get as much accurate, factual information into the community so that there's an understanding. Like I said, none of us are making money off this. Our wood's not worth anything. It's just not. The wood that you see coming off these projects gets shipped down to a mill to be turned into OSB board. It's not even worth board feet. Yeah, we end up paying the contractors to get this fuel out of here in exorbitant amounts, no less. So that I know is one myth that is out there that is so completely false. It's just laughable. And so that's our reality, is that we are incredibly behind the 8 ball in getting these forests back into a healthy place, because they are so incredibly sick and dying. And it's just vast. I mean, look around, right? There's so much to get back in check. And it's, like I said, we stuck our finger in the pie to begin with by suppressing fire and then building our houses in the middle of it all. So, any other questions?
You used
Yes,
the term one time, calling them weed trees. What's growing up that are, what's happening?
I say a lot of things off color, sorry.
But, you know, is that a particular species, or is that just a lot of little trees together that should be thinned out?
So typically speaking, the Doug fir are kind of the ones I tend to lean into in that analogy. And go ahead, Tony.
No, it's when you're done.
Oh, okay. And so it is the regen trees, we call them regen, and it's the regeneration of these smaller trees. It does come back a little bit to the science of that individual species, because ponderosa pine, I'm not as worried about if it is in a good, healthy opening for it to have that age diversity. But a whole carpet of Doug fir babies, those were supposed to burn. And so those become more problematic just by species. Does that make sense? Is that answering your question, Tony?
And yeah, something to add on to that too, I think something that gets lost is all of those seedlings and saplings that would have been removed by the fire, that all started 100, 150 years ago. All of those trees have grown up now. So we're not just talking about, you know, when Coleman or when DMP or Jeffco is doing these projects. That's why we're not just targeting seedlings and saplings. Unfortunately, so many of those trees that should have been removed by natural processes were allowed to remain intact. So that's why we're actually removing a lot of trees that are 100 to 150 years old. And that's where I think a lot of the community pushback understandably comes from, is we're taking out a lot of these medium-sized trees that seem very old to us as humans, to where really we're not seeing these really good characteristics from pondos that we're looking for until 200, 250 years old. So we're taking out these ones that would have been removed by seedlings, but we're so far behind. That's where we're having to actually take out some of these larger trees.
And to Matt's, if you think back to Matt's slides at the beginning, talking about different approaches in these treatments, some of it is canopy spacing. Like I said, 6 horses abreast through ponderosa stands. So it's, you know, to Tony's point, some of these trees are 150 years old post-fire suppression, and we got to open that back up completely. So, you know, what we have to really be mindful of is that forestry is a vast span of time. We are a blip, but we all get very emotionally connected, right? And our blip of our, you know, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of life, that's a blip in forestry terms. So when we go in and we do these projects, it is very emotionally disturbing, because we're trying to hit 150 years of mitigation in one season. And so that can be jarring, shocking, whoa. But again, it is based on the stand, it's based on, you know, all of our projects take into account wildlife, watershed, forest health. The fire mitigation is the bonus on the back end of all of that. You get all those other things in line and in place, the fire mitigation checks its own box. Really?
I'm gonna reopen a can of beans then. You've done all the mitigation in Alder for Three Sisters, which
Yes.
is just down the street from me. In 5 years, are you gonna go back and pull weeds?
Yes. Yeah, so noxious weeds, like I said, I'm in charge of.
Not noxious weeds,
Oh.
I mean regen.
Okay, sorry, you got my other
Yeah.
side job going.
Actual weeds.
We are very much on top of the weed thing too. But yeah, that is absolutely a big part of the thing is what are we gonna do? How are we gonna maintain this cycle? We can't just cut it and walk away. Ideally, we wanna bring back what nature did, broadcast burning. That'd be great. We used to burn elk meadow all the time, I understand. More people live here, air quality has become a bigger concern, so we still very much wanna bring back wildfire. If we don't, what we've been really, prescribed fire, excuse me. Wildfire is coming back whether we want it or not, yeah. We wanna bring back prescribed fire. We have had some luck with volunteers. We will bring in masticators, so a machine that chews, to try to get it, but yeah, on a 5 to 30 year time scale, we are trying to re-enter these parks as well. If you just treat it and let nothing happen, and that regen can come in and thrive, we're just right back. So yeah, great question. It doesn't end now.
It's a whole lot cheaper. Tony and I talk about it all the time, like we can get a volunteer group to come in with loppers, that's a heck of a lot cheaper than, and less impactful than big machinery on the initial cut, so.
Yeah, Coleman and I did not get into this to cut down big trees.
No.
We would much rather only be cutting seedlings and
Yeah,
saplings,
just
like
walk through the woods with you all
wildfire.
with loppers.
I'm hoping that's the program I hand off to my predecessors. Is they're no longer cutting, you know, in the stands. We are. They're doing the maintenance fires. That's my goal, my dream, maybe.
I have a question about the noxious weeds, and it might be, I guess, more on a small scale, like homeowner basis. Like, is mullein or
Mullein?
Yeah. Is that a fairly noxious weed? And what is your recommendation on, you know, how to approach management of it?
Definitely. Yeah, mullein is one we see a lot. It comes in right after forestry, any disturbance really. Super prolific. Its seeds last 160 years or so. Each plant makes about 250,000 seeds. So it is very much one of those things we have zero interest in trying to eradicate. That would just be completely foolish. What we try to do is minimize it. Mullein is really weak as far as it needs a lot of sun, is how I should have said that. So if you can get other plants to establish with it, it'll usually get crowded out in a year or two. The best way to kill mullein is when it's on the ground flat. You can go ahead and pull it. Once it's shot up its stalk, probably better off just leaving that alone. You might want to cut the seed head off, but pulling it out, you're just going to expose a couple more of that 250,000 seed and do that. Yeah, the big thing with mullein is get other stuff to come in. It's pretty weak. It makes a big show the first year or two and then goes away.
You gotta bag that head.
Yeah, yes, if you cut the head off, throw it away.
Put it in a bag.
That
because it will-
plastic bag,
yes.
If you put it on the ground, it'll.
Yeah.
It'll still do its thing.
What about cheatgrass?
Oh goodness. Next question.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, if we go back 2 slides, highly recommend checking out the county's weed and pest website. Alicia Doran's our coordinator, and she does a great job. Yeah, definitely want to recognize too, we are 15 minutes after. Thank you all for staying. If people need to leave, please head out. All of us that spoke, I think, are going to hang out until answer questions as long as we can. But yeah, totally understand if people need to
Great
leave.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah.